9-year-old girl living on the street finds a wallet full of money belonging to a renowned lawyer. What he did surprised everyone. It was a rainy morning when Laura, just 7 years old, saw her world collapse. The young girl with black hair held tightly to her mother Lucy's hand as they left the small house they called home. The doors were locked, and the furniture piled up on the sidewalk was all that remained of their possessions. Lucy, with a lost look and tired marks on her face, knew they had nowhere to go. Evicted for non-payment of rent, Lucy and Laura suddenly found themselves without a roof over their heads. Lucy, who had been battling alcoholism for years, tried to keep her head up for her daughter. But the constant battle against her own demons debilitated her every day. That grey afternoon, the two headed downtown, seeking refuge on the streets. Lucy's struggle with alcoholism had begun a few years earlier when Laura's father, a hard-working and loving man, suddenly died of cardiac arrest. The devastating loss sent Lucy into a spiral of sadness and despair. Alcohol became an escape, a way to numb the pain of loss. However, this escape quickly turned into an addiction that drove her further away from reality and her daughter. The first weeks on the streets were the hardest. Without the security of a home, Laura and Lucy wandered the streets, looking for a place to sleep in peace. The cold of the night seeped into their bones, and the constant noise of the city was a cruel reminder of their new reality. However, Laura, with the innocence of her age, found small joys in simple things. A flower blooming on the sidewalk, a friendly smile from a stranger. In the street-dwelling community, Lucy and Laura found unexpected support. People who, despite their own difficulties, extended a helping hand. Mrs. Molly, an elderly woman with grey hair who had lived there for years, became a motherly figure to Laura. She taught the girl the importance of honesty and solidarity, values that kept the community united. Her motto was simple: "On the street, we are all family." Lucy, however, struggled to stay sober. The temptations of alcohol were always present, and the lack of hope made the fight even harder. Her health began to deteriorate rapidly. Lucy's once vibrant face became pale and thin, and her eyes, once full of life, now reflected only pain and regret. One particularly cold night, Lucy succumbed to her illness. Alcohol had destroyed her liver, and without access to medical care, she didn't survive. Laura held her mother's hand until her last breath, silent tears streaming down her dirty face. Sitting next to her mother's body, Laura felt more alone than ever. The pain of loss was unbearable, and the uncertainty of the future terrifying. Mrs. Molly and other street dwellers helped Laura bury Lucy in a simple grave marked only by a stone. At that moment, the young girl promised herself she would honor the teachings of her mother and the friends she made on the streets. Determined to survive, she began to build her life from that painful starting point. Life on the streets was relentless, but Laura was unwilling to give up. With the strength and resilience that Lucy had taught her, she moved forward, carrying in her heart the memory of her mother and the desire to one day find a place she could truly call home. The first days after Lucy's death were the hardest for Laura. Without her mother by her side, the 8-year-old girl had to find strength she never imagined possessing. Alone on the streets, facing the biting cold and constant hunger, Laura found herself forced to mature quickly. On the first night without her mother, Laura found shelter under the awning of a closed shop. The cold winter wind cut through her thin clothes, and she curled up, trying in vain to warm herself. Her stomach growled with hunger, but Laura knew she had to be strong. Her only comfort was the memory of happy moments with her mother, and the determination to honor the teachings of honesty and courage that Lucy always valued. Gradually, Laura began to explore her surroundings. On the streets, she found a group of homeless people who, like her mother, had sad stories and difficult pasts. Among them stood out George, a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a welcoming smile. He noticed the young girl alone and decided to help her. George taught Laura the secrets of surviving on the streets. He showed her where to find discarded food, how to avoid dangerous areas, and the best places to shelter at night. He also introduced her to other members of the street community, including Mrs. Molly, who became a sort of grandmother to Laura. Mrs. Molly was a woman with a strong spirit and a generous heart. Even with the difficulties she faced, she always found a way to care for others. For Laura, she was a source of advice and comfort. Molly always said, "Life on the street is tough, but it's still life. We need each other to survive." Over time, Laura began to develop a resilient and determined mindset. She learned not to be overwhelmed by adversity and to find creative solutions to the problems that arose. When the cold was intense, she remembered George and Mrs. Molly's teachings, seeking safer shelters and making improvised fires with discarded materials. Despite the difficulties, Laura also found moments of joy. The friendship with other homeless people brought her laughter and shared stories around a fire. The community cared for her like an unlikely family, and that gave her the strength to continue. Laura also learned to value small achievements, like finding a hot meal or a good blanket. Life on the streets was a constant battle, but Laura refused to give up. Each challenge faced, each difficulty overcome made her stronger and more determined. She never lost sight of the promise she made to herself and her mother. One day, she would leave the streets and find a place she could truly call home. Laura knew the path would be long and arduous, but with the resilience she developed and the support of her new family on the streets, she was determined to fight for a better future. And so, day by day, the young girl continued to face adversities with courage and hope, keeping alive the memory of her mother and the values she taught her. It was a cold, starry night, the kind of night when the wind seemed to cut the skin like ice blades. Laura, now 9 years old, was sheltered under the awning of a closed shop, wrapped in a thin blanket she had gotten the day before. Her keen eyes watched the movement on the streets, always alert for any sign of danger or opportunity. Suddenly, a shiny black luxury car stopped in front of a renowned restaurant in the area. The restaurant, known for its glamour and high-class clientele, was far from Laura's reality. But she knew the people who frequented that place lived in a completely different world from hers. She watched curiously as an elegant man got out of the car. The man was tall and grey-haired, with a striking presence. He wore an impeccable suit and moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to success. As he got out of the car, he accidentally dropped his wallet, which discreetly slid to the curb. He entered the restaurant without noticing his loss. Laura, watching from afar, saw the wallet fall. She hesitated for a moment, remembering the teachings of honesty she received from her mother and street friends. Decided to do the right thing, she ran to the wallet, picked it up and waited. She knew the man would return to look for it. It didn't take long for Albert Morgan, the renowned lawyer, to realize his wallet was missing. He left the restaurant with a panicked expression, his eyes scanning the sidewalk desperately. When he finally saw Laura, a small, frail girl holding his wallet, his relief was immediate. "Sir, I think this is yours," said Laura, extending the wallet to him. Albert stopped, surprised and impressed by the girl's honesty. He took the wallet gratefully, a warm smile spreading across his face. "Thank you very much, little girl. You saved my day." He looked more closely at Laura, noticing her state. "What's your name?" "Laura," she replied shyly. "Laura, I'd like to thank you properly. How about you join me for dinner at the restaurant?" Laura hesitated. She had never entered a place like that, and the idea made her nervous. But the kindness in Albert's eyes comforted her, and her empty stomach couldn't refuse the offer of a hot meal. "All right," she finally said. Albert smiled again and led her to the restaurant. As they entered, Laura was dazzled by the luxury of the place. Shiny chandeliers hung from the ceiling, elegantly arranged tables, and soft music filled the environment. The security guard cast a surprised look at Laura, but said nothing when he saw she was with Albert. They sat at a table near the window, and a waiter quickly came to attend to them. Intimidated, Laura let Albert choose the food. As they waited, Albert observed her with curiosity, intrigued by the story of such a young and at the same time so brave girl. When the waiter brought the menu and started reciting the house specials, Laura looked around in amazement. The warmth of the restaurant contrasted with the biting cold outside, and the feeling of being safe, even if just for a moment, was comforting. "Let's order something delicious, Laura. I'm sure you'll like it," said Albert with an encouraging smile. Laura nodded, a little more relaxed, and watched as he placed the orders. She felt strangely at ease in the presence of that kind man. Her stomach rumbled with anticipation, and for a brief moment, she allowed herself to forget the difficulties awaiting her outside. And so, in that luxurious restaurant, a night began that would forever change Laura's life. The welcoming atmosphere of the restaurant was a stark contrast to the coldness of the streets outside. The soft lights and calm music created an almost magical environment for Laura, who couldn't help but look around with wide eyes of fascination. Sitting at the table with Albert, she felt as if she were in a dream. While they waited for the food, Albert tried to start a light conversation, but soon realized Laura was anxious and a bit withdrawn. He then decided to be patient, letting her feel comfortable in her own time. When the dishes arrived, filled with delicious aromas, Laura couldn't hide her surprise and gratitude. "You can eat as much as you want, Laura," said Albert with a warm smile. "Don't worry about anything." The girl started eating slowly, but soon hunger spoke louder, and she devoured the food enthusiastically. Albert watched with a mix of tenderness and concern. He knew that this girl had a difficult story and wanted to understand better how he could help her. After a few minutes of silence, Laura looked up, meeting Albert's gentle gaze. Feeling more at ease, she began to speak, initially with hesitation, but soon her life story flowed with touching sincerity. She spoke about her father's death, her mother's struggle with alcoholism, and how they were evicted from their home. She described the harsh reality of the streets and how her mother had passed away, leaving her alone. Albert listened attentively without interrupting, feeling deeply moved by each word of Laura. He could see the pain and resilience in the girl's eyes, and it touched something within him. When she finished telling her story, he took a moment to process everything before speaking. "Laura, you are a very brave girl," he said softly. "I can't imagine how difficult it has been for you." She just nodded, still a bit shy. "I want to help you," Albert continued. "You can't keep living on the streets. It's not safe, and you deserve much more than that. How about you spend the night at my house? You can take a hot bath, eat something, and sleep in a comfortable bed. What do you think?" Laura hesitated. The offer seemed too good to be true, but the sincerity in Albert's eyes made her feel she could trust him. With a small nod, she accepted. "All right," she murmured, almost inaudibly. Albert smiled, relieved. "Great. Let's finish eating and then we'll go home. I'm sure you'll like it." After finishing their meal, they went directly to Albert's house. During the trip, Helena looked out the window, her heart beating fast with a mix of excitement and nervousness. When they arrived, she was impressed by the cozy and well-kept house. Albert showed her where the bathroom was and gave her some clean, warm clothes. Laura took a long bath, feeling the hot water wash away not only the street's dirt, but also some of the weight she carried on her shoulders. After the bath, she put on the comfortable clothes and felt a nearly forgotten relief. Albert prepared a hot tea for Laura and led her to a cozy room. The bed felt like a true luxury, and Laura lay down, feeling the comfort of the soft mattress and warm blankets. Albert smiled as he saw her settle in. "Good night, Laura. Sleep well," he said, turning off the light and gently closing the door. Lying in the darkness of the large room, Laura reflected on the day's events. For the first time in a long time, she felt safe and cared for. As sleep enveloped her, she thought of the possibility of a new beginning. The unexpected encounter with Albert not only gave her hope, but also a chance for a different future. And with that hope, she fell into a deep sleep, dreaming of better days that could come. The first rays of sunlight were streaming through the curtains of the cozy room when Laura woke up. For a moment, she forgot where she was. The soft mattress, warm blankets, and comforting silence were a drastic change from the cold and noisy streets. As she remembered the night before, a small smile formed on her face. She was at Albert's house, a man who had treated her with kindness she hadn't experienced in a long time. Getting out of bed was like leaving a dream. Laura found clean clothes folded on a chair next to the bed. She dressed quickly and went downstairs, following the irresistible smell of fresh coffee and toast. Albert was in the kitchen, preparing breakfast. "Good morning, Laura. Did you sleep well?" he asked with a smile. "I did, thank you," she replied, still a bit shy. They sat at the table and shared a simple but nutritious meal. Albert tried to put her at ease, asking about her food preferences and telling funny stories about his work. Gradually, Laura began to relax and feel more comfortable in this new routine. In the following days, Laura started to adapt to life in Albert's house. She helped with household chores, quickly learning to clean, cook, and organize things. Albert, in turn, made every effort to provide a safe and welcoming environment for the girl. He bought new clothes, books, and toys, trying to create a sense of normalcy for her. As Laura adapted to the new routine, she also learned more about Albert. He was a renowned lawyer known for his dedication and ethics at work. Albert had never married and lived alone in a spacious house. One afternoon, as the two talked in the living room, Albert shared a personal part of his life. "Laura, I never married and don't have children," he began with a thoughtful tone. "A few years ago, I found out I'm sterile. I can't have biological children. It was hard to accept at first, but I ended up dedicating myself to my work and accepting my situation." Laura listened attentively, feeling a mix of curiosity and empathy. She realized that despite his seemingly perfect life, Albert also had his own struggles and challenges. Laura's presence brought a new dynamic to Albert's life. He found himself increasingly attached to the girl, admiring her courage and resilience. Gradually, an idea began to take shape in his mind: the possibility of adopting Laura. However, he was still hesitant. Adoption was a big and complex decision, and Albert questioned whether he was ready to take on this responsibility. Albert consulted some friends and colleagues about the matter, seeking advice and perspectives. Everyone encouraged the idea, highlighting how much he and Laura could benefit from this new family relationship. Still, doubts persisted. He wanted to be sure he could offer Laura the support and love she needed and deserved. While Albert pondered adoption, Laura continued to adapt to life in the house. She excelled in her tasks, showed interest in learning new things, and gradually her face gained a shine of hope that had disappeared during her days on the streets. The weeks passed, and the bond between Albert and Laura grew stronger. Each smile, each gesture of affection, made Albert feel more inclined to make that temporary home something permanent. He knew the decision needed to be made with care and reflection, but deep down he felt that Laura was already part of his family. Albert sat in his office, the lamp's light casting soft shadows on the walls. In his hands, he held a document with information about adoption. He had spent the last few weeks consulting friends and colleagues, listening to advice, and reflecting on the possibility of adopting Laura. Now, with all the information before him, It was time to make a decision. The pros and cons danced in his mind. On one side, he saw the chance to offer Laura a stable and loving home, something she had never had. He could provide her with education, security, and above all, a family. However, on the other side, doubts about his ability to be a good father emerged. Albert had never taken on such a responsibility and wondered if he was up to the challenge. As he pondered, his mind returned to the moments he had shared with Laura in the past weeks. He remembered her smile when learning something new, the way her eyes shone when they talked about her dreams. Laura's presence had brought a new joy to his life, a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in a long time. However, the fear of failure still haunted him. What if he couldn't meet Laura's emotional and psychological needs? What if, despite his good intentions, he couldn't provide the love and support she needed? Meanwhile, in her room, Laura felt a whirlwind of emotions. Albert's house was starting to feel like home to her. The routines, dinner conversations, moments of laughter and learning all made her feel part of a family. However, a shadow of fear hung over her heart. What if all this was temporary? What if at any moment she was sent back to the streets? Each time Albert left for work or had a meeting, Laura worried. She wondered if he was thinking about sending her away, if his doubts would outweigh the affection he seemed to show. She tried to focus on tasks and studies, but the uncertainty about her future made everything more difficult. Albert knew Laura was apprehensive. He saw the same insecurity in her eyes that he felt in his heart. He decided he needed to talk to her, to be honest about his feelings and plans. Maybe together, they could find a solution that brought peace to both. That night after dinner, Albert called Laura to sit with him in the living room. "Laura, I've been thinking a lot about us and the future," he began, trying to keep his voice steady. "I know this must be confusing and scary for you, but I want you to know that you are very important to me." Laura looked at him, her eyes filled with hope and fear. "I also like being here with you, Albert," she replied with a trembling voice, "but I'm scared of having to go back to the streets." Albert held Laura's hands, squeezing them with tenderness. "I understand your fear, Laura, and I want you to know I'm doing everything I can to make the best decision for both of us. I know adoption is a big step, and I still have some doubts, but I want you to know my desire is to provide you with a safe and loving home." Laura nodded, feeling a mix of relief and anxiety. The conversation didn't eliminate all her worries, but knowing that Albert was seriously considering adoption and genuinely cared about her brought unexpected comfort. And so, as Albert continued to weigh the pros and cons and face his own insecurities, Laura found strength in the hope for a better future. After weeks of reflection and honest conversations with Laura, Albert decided it was time to take the next step. He was determined to provide her with the home she so deserved. With a resolute heart, he began preparing the necessary paperwork to start the adoption process. On the morning of their first meeting with the social worker, Laura was nervous but also excited. Dressed in new clothes that Albert had bought, she looked like an ordinary girl, but her eyes still carried the wisdom and pain of her experiences on the streets. "It will be all right, Laura," said Albert as they waited in the reception of the social services office. "Just be yourself. They just want to get to know you better." Laura nodded, trying to smile. When the social worker, a middle-aged woman with a kind demeanor, called them in, she squeezed Albert's hand for comfort. The first interviews were challenging for both. Laura had to relive painful parts of her past, answering questions about her life on the streets and her mother's loss. However, her honesty and resilience shone in every answer. She talked about the values her mother taught her, the importance of honesty and solidarity, and how Albert helped her find new hope. The social worker was impressed by Laura's maturity and Albert's dedication. They went through several stages of the process, including home visits, psychological evaluations, and interviews with both. At each stage, the connection between Albert and Laura grew stronger. During one of the home visits, the social worker observed the interaction between the two. She saw how Albert cared about Laura's well-being, always attentive to her needs and emotions. Laura, in turn, showed genuine affection and deep respect for Albert. "It is evident that you two have a very special bond," commented the social worker during one of the evaluations. "That is crucial for the adoption process." Albert smiled, relieved, and looked at Laura, who returned the smile with shining eyes. The following months were filled with expectations and anxiety. Each new stage completed was a step closer to officially becoming a family. Meanwhile, the routine at Albert's house continued to adjust. Laura was doing well in school, making new friends and exploring her interests. Albert, in turn, felt increasingly comfortable in the role of father. He discovered a side of himself he didn't know, an infinite capacity for love and patience. The nights were filled with bedtime stories, laughter during dinner, and deep conversations about dreams and fears. One late afternoon, after another round of interviews, they returned home, tired but hopeful. Albert sat on the sofa, Laura by his side. He looked at the girl who now occupied such a big place in his heart and felt a wave of emotion. "We're almost there, Laura," he said, putting his arm around her shoulders. "I know the process is hard, but we're doing this together, and that's what matters." Laura rested her head on Albert's shoulder, feeling safe and loved. "I know, Albert, and I'm very happy about that." And so, day by day, step by step, the bond between Albert and Laura solidified. The adoption process was arduous, but each challenge faced only reinforced the certainty that they were on the right path. They were not just a girl and a man trying to build a new life. They were becoming a true family. The day of the final hearing came faster than Laura and Albert expected. That morning, both were nervous but optimistic. They sat side by side in the courtroom, awaiting the judge who would decide their future. Albert held Laura's hand, offering her comfort and security. The judge, a middle-aged man with a kind expression, entered the room and reviewed the documents before him. After a few moments of silence, he looked at Albert and Laura. "Mr. Morgan, Laura, I have reviewed all the material on your case. It is clear that you have formed a strong and loving bond," he said, pausing with a slight smile. "I am pleased to announce that the adoption is officially approved. Congratulations, you are now officially father and daughter." Laura could hardly believe it. Tears of joy streamed down her face as she hugged Albert. He wrapped her in a tight embrace, also emotional. "We are a family now, Laura," he said with a voice choked with emotion. "Yes, we are," she replied with a radiant smile. With the adoption official, a new phase began for Laura. She started attending a school near Albert's house, a school with good facilities and dedicated teachers. On the first day of school, Laura was anxious but also excited. Albert accompanied her to the school gate, encouraging her with words of support. "You'll do great, Laura," he said. "Remember to be yourself and show all your potential." Laura nodded, feeling confident. The first weeks were challenging, but she soon stood out for her intelligence and dedication. Her teachers quickly noticed her academic potential, and Laura began to engage in various extracurricular activities, from the reading club to the math team. With each report card, Albert's pride grew. He saw Laura's progress with a mix of joy and admiration. She was not only excelling academically, but also making friends and becoming a confident and determined young woman. One night, while Laura was doing her homework at the kitchen table, Albert approached and sat next to her. "I am very proud of you, Laura," he said with a warm smile. "You've been working hard and showing incredible talent. I want you to know that I'll do everything I can to ensure you have a bright future." Laura looked at him, her eyes shining with gratitude. "Thank you, Albert. You've given me a chance for a better life, and I won't waste it." Albert stroked Laura's hair, feeling deep satisfaction for all they had accomplished together. As the months passed, Laura's life continued to flourish. She participated in school competitions, won awards, and became a positive reference among her peers. Albert, always present and encouraging, ensured she had every opportunity to grow and develop. Albert's house, which once seemed large and empty, was now full of life and laughter. They spent weekends exploring museums, parks, and libraries, always looking for new ways to learn and have fun together. Albert knew the road ahead would still have challenges, but he was determined to face each one alongside Laura. His promise to provide her with a bright future was not just a statement, but a daily commitment. And so, with love, dedication, and renewed confidence in the future, Albert and Laura walked together, building a life full of hope and possibilities. The years passed quickly, and Laura, now 17, was entering adolescence. School continued to be a place where she shone academically, but social and academic pressures began to intensify. Like any teenager, Laura faced the typical challenges of this phase of life. Friendships became more complicated, with groups of friends forming and breaking up quickly. Laura felt the pressure to fit in, to be accepted by her peers, and this sometimes conflicted with her values and personality. Academic demands also increased, with more tasks, projects, and expectations. Additionally, questions about her origins began to arise more frequently. Laura couldn't help but wonder about her mother, Lucy, and her father. These questions silently haunted her, creating a mix of sadness and curiosity in her heart. One night, after a particularly difficult day at school, Laura was sitting on the house porch, looking at the stars. Albert noticed her distress and decided to join her. He sat next to her, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Are you okay, Laura?" he asked softly. She sighed without taking her eyes off the starry sky. "I'm just thinking about a lot of things, Albert. Sometimes I miss my mum so much. And I wonder about my dad. I know almost nothing about him. When he died, I was very young, and my mum didn't talk much about him. When she did, she soon started crying. I remember that." Albert took a deep breath, knowing this was an important and delicate conversation. He had always known this moment would come, but that didn't make it any easier. "I understand, Laura. It's natural to miss and have these questions. Your mother, Lucy, was a strong woman despite all the difficulties she faced. She loved you very much and did her best to take care of you. I'm sure of that, even though I didn't know her." "Thank you, Albert. I think I needed to hear that." He hugged her tightly, wanting to convey all the support and love he felt for her. "I will always be here for you, Laura, for any questions you have, for any difficult moment. You are my daughter, and I love you very much." She nestled into Albert's embrace, feeling safe and loved. "I love you too, Albert, very much." The challenges of adolescence didn't disappear after that conversation, but something changed within Laura. Knowing she could talk openly about her past and her questions with Albert made her feel stronger and more secure. She knew that no matter what difficulties arose, she wasn't alone. Albert, in turn, committed to continuing to be Laura's pillar of support, helping her navigate the complexities of adolescence and facing his own insecurities. The connection between them, built on trust and love, grew stronger every day. At 17, Laura made a decision that would shape her future, to follow in Albert's footsteps and study law. Inspired by the example of integrity and justice he represented, Laura felt she could make a difference in the world, especially for those who, like her, had faced great difficulties. The decision to study law brought a series of challenges. The course was demanding, and Laura soon discovered that the path to becoming a lawyer would not be easy. The readings were dense, the concepts complex, and the exams rigorous. There were days when she felt overwhelmed, questioning her ability to continue. One particularly difficult night, Laura was at the kitchen table, surrounded by books and notes, trying to understand a complicated case. Albert came in and saw the despair in her eyes. "It looks like you're having a tough night," he said, sitting next to her. "It's much harder than I imagined, Albert," she admitted, rubbing her tired eyes. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm doing the right thing." Albert smiled, remembering his own struggles during law school. "I know exactly how you feel. I went through that too. But you are smart and determined, Laura. I know you can overcome these challenges, and I'm here to help you, always." With Albert's constant support, Laura began to gain confidence. He reviewed cases with her, explained difficult concepts, and shared his own experiences. Albert's patience and encouragement were a constant source of motivation for Laura. Besides her studies, Laura began to get involved in social causes, something she had always been passionate about. She joined a group of students offering free legal assistance to underprivileged communities. Helping the less fortunate gave Laura renewed purpose and a deep connection to her own roots. On one of her visits to a shelter where they provided assistance, Laura met Mrs. Mary, an elderly woman living on the streets who needed help obtaining her social benefits. Mrs. Mary's story deeply touched Laura, reminding her of the days when she and her mother struggled to survive on the streets. "I'll help you, Mrs. Mary," Laura said determinedly. "We'll get your rights." Working tirelessly, Laura and her colleagues built Mrs. Mary's case, gathering documents and presenting solid arguments. The process was long and difficult, but Laura's persistence paid off when they managed to get the benefits approved. "Thank you, my dear," said Mrs. Mary with tears in her eyes. "You changed my life." Laura felt indescribable pride. She knew she was on the right path, not only for her studies, but for the impact she could have on people's lives. Each case she took, each person she helped, reinforced her commitment to justice and equality. As Laura continued to excel in college and her social activities, Albert watched with admiration and pride. He knew she would face many challenges ahead, but he also knew Laura had the strength and resilience needed to overcome them. Choosing to pursue a career in law and get involved in social causes brought responsibilities and difficulties, but also immense satisfaction. Laura was not only building her future, but also giving back to society in a way that honored the life lessons she had learned from her mother and Albert. And so, step by step, Laura advanced on her journey, determined to make a difference and create a better future for those who needed it most. The morning of Laura's graduation arrived with a clear and sunny sky, reflecting the joy and pride that filled Albert's heart. He watched with bright eyes as Laura, dressed in her graduation gown, adjusted her cap in the mirror. The young woman before him was the same girl he had rescued from the streets, but now she stood confident and determined, ready to embrace the future. "You look beautiful, Laura," said Albert, emotional. "Today is a big day." Laura smiled, feeling a mix of nervousness and excitement. "Thank you, Albert. I wouldn't have made it here without you." The graduation ceremony was a solemn and emotional event. As the graduates sat in orderly rows, Albert sat in the audience, eager to hear Laura's name called. The college president gave an inspiring speech, highlighting the students' achievements and challenges over the years. When the moment finally came, Laura's name echoed through the speakers. "Laura Morgan with honors." Applause resounded through the auditorium as Laura climbed the stage to receive her diploma. Albert felt tears of pride fill his eyes. The journey that had begun with uncertainties and challenges culminated now in a moment of triumph. He watched Laura, radiant and confident, accept her diploma with a smile of achievement. After the ceremony, Albert and Laura reunited outside, where friends celebrated together. Albert hugged her tightly, holding her for a moment that seemed eternal. "Congratulations, Laura. You deserve every moment of this day. I'm so proud of you." "Thank you, Dad," said Laura, the word Dad loaded with love and gratitude. "I couldn't have done this without your support." Albert wiped a solitary tear, smiling at the daughter he loved so much. They took photos, laughed, and shared stories of that memorable day. Later, at a special dinner to celebrate the graduation, Laura made an important announcement. "I've been thinking a lot about what I want to do next," she began, looking at Albert and the friends present. "And I've decided that I want to dedicate my career to defending the rights of the underprivileged. I want to give back in some way, help those who need it most, just like I was helped." Albert nodded, feeling renewed pride. He knew that Laura's decision was a reflection of her character and the values she held dear. "I knew you would do something incredible, Laura," he said. "And I'm sure you'll make a huge difference in many people's lives." The following months were filled with intense preparation. Laura got a job at a law firm specializing in human rights and social causes. Her passion and dedication were evident from day one. She dived headfirst into challenging cases, fighting for justice and equality. Albert continued to support her every step of the way, offering advice and always being there when she needed it. He saw the determination in Laura's eyes and knew she was exactly where she needed to be. And so, with Albert's unwavering support and the respect of her community, Laura embarked on her career, dedicating herself to defending the rights of the underprivileged and fighting for a more just world. The future was bright, and Laura was determined to make her mark on the world. Laura's first day at the law firm was a milestone in her journey. The small, modest office was known for its dedication to cases many other lawyers avoided: the rights of the homeless, abuses against workers, and systemic injustices that affected the underprivileged. For Laura, it was the perfect place to apply her knowledge and passion for justice. From the very first days, Laura was immersed in an intense workload. The cases were varied and complex, each requiring a careful and empathetic approach. She worked alongside colleagues who shared her dedication, and together they faced the challenge of fighting against a system often indifferent to those in need. As time passed, Laura continued to get involved in cases that challenged social injustices. She worked on projects defending the rights of the homeless, fought against illegal evictions, and dedicated herself to child protection causes. Each victorious case increased her influence and reaffirmed her commitment to justice. One afternoon, after another significant victory, Albert visited Laura's office. He proudly observed the plaque on the door that read, "Laura Morgan, Social Causes Lawyer." "You're doing an incredible job, Laura," he said as they sat in her small office, filled with files and papers. "Thank you, Dad," Laura replied, smiling. "Every victory, every small change reminds me why I chose this career. I want to make a difference, and I think I'm succeeding." Albert nodded, knowing that Laura was destined for great things. Her courage, empathy, and intelligence not only made her an exceptional lawyer, but also a natural leader and an inspiration to everyone around her. Laura's fight for justice continued, with new challenges arising every day. But she was ready to face them, armed with the experience, knowledge, and passion that had guided her from the beginning of her journey. And so, with Albert's unwavering support and the respect of her community, Laura established herself as a tireless advocate for the rights of the underprivileged, building a legacy of justice and compassion. One sunny afternoon, as Laura walked through downtown, she was unexpectedly transported back to her past. She was on her way to a meeting when, passing through a park, she saw a group of homeless people. There was something familiar about the scene that made her stop. She observed the faces marked by time and adversity and suddenly recognized a figure. "Mrs. Molly," Laura whispered in disbelief. The grey-haired elderly woman bent under the weight of the years, lifted her eyes, and after a moment, a smile of recognition spread across her face. "Laura, is that really you, my child?" asked Mrs. Molly, tears in her eyes. They hugged, and Laura felt a wave of emotions. Mrs. Molly had been a motherly figure to her during the tough times on the streets. Sitting next to Mrs. Molly and hearing her stories again brought a mix of nostalgia and sadness. "I never forgot you, Mrs. Molly," said Laura, holding the old friend's hands. "You helped me when I needed it most." Talking to Mrs. Molly and other homeless people she knew, Laura realized how much her life had changed and how much still needed to be done to help those who continued to face the difficulties she had overcome. Returning home that night, Laura couldn't stop thinking about the people she had reunited with. She knew she had to do something more, something significant to give back to the community that had helped her in her darkest moments. Inspired by these reflections, she made a decision. "Albert, I need to talk to you," said Laura as she entered the living room where he was reading a book. "Of course, Laura. What's up?" he asked, concerned by the serious expression on her face. "Today I met Mrs. Molly and other friends from the streets. It was an emotional reunion, but also a painful reminder that there are still many people suffering." She paused, searching for the right words. "I want to create an organization to help the homeless. I want to give them the support I received and much more. I want to help them find a way out of the streets, just like you helped me." Albert looked at her with pride and emotion. "That's a wonderful idea, Laura. You always had a big heart. I'm sure you can make a big difference." With Albert's support, Laura began planning her new organization. She gathered lawyer colleagues, social workers, and volunteers willing to contribute their time and skills. She decided to name the organization New Beginning, symbolizing the hope and opportunities she wanted to offer. The mission of New Beginning was clear: provide legal assistance, temporary shelter, food, and most importantly, rehabilitation and reintegration programs for the homeless. Laura wanted everyone to have a second chance like she had. The first few months were intense. Laura worked tirelessly, organizing fundraising events, establishing partnerships with local businesses, and creating awareness campaigns. Every small success was a victory celebrated by the entire team. At an inauguration event with many supporters and beneficiaries present, Laura took the stage to speak. "Today, we begin a new journey," she said, looking at the crowd. "New Beginning is not just an organization. It's a symbol of hope, resilience, and the belief that everyone deserves a second chance. I thank everyone who made this possible and promise that we will continue to fight for a better future for all." Applause and tears of emotion filled the place. Albert, watching closely, couldn't be prouder. He knew that Laura was doing something truly extraordinary, transforming her past into a powerful force for good. And so Laura, now a respected lawyer and community leader, continued her mission. Confronting the past and using the lessons she had learned, she created a future of hope and opportunity for those still in the shadows. The fight for justice and compassion was not just her career, but her life, and she was determined to make a difference one step at a time. I hope you enjoyed today's story. If you did, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought about the story.